Hi, everybody. We're here in the International Monetary Fund headquarters in Washington, D.C. That music you're hearing is actually a celebration of Brazilian culture. Brazil, one of 190 member countries for the IMF, and one of the larger ones actually is Egypt. And I'm joined now by Minister Dr. Rania Al-Mashat. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being at the spring meetings.
Yeah, it's great to see you again. And this has been a week. I would say the central tension that I've noticed is between short-term needs that countries are facing in the middle of all of this economic downturn, and then the long-term goals around things like climate. To tackle the first one first, what more do you think the international community should be doing in the short term around issues like acute hunger to ensure that nations can start to focus on the bigger goals?
Well, I think the backdrop is, of course, the geopolitical situation that has pushed up not just food prices, but on the back of shortages in food supply. It started that way. Inflation started growing, fuel prices started growing, a tightening cycle started, and therefore emerging markets are under a lot of pressure, not just because of inflation, but also because of capital flight and the tightening in interest rates. You're absolutely correct. There's a short-term urgency to deal with that, and then the long term when it has to do with growth. But nonetheless, in the short term, the growth is dropping, and therefore the potential growth over the medium to long term is also going to be affected. As we are here at the World Bank and discussions, immediate response to try and tackle increased food prices and the impact of inflation, safety nets. So the international community helping countries through different financing tools to try and widen the safety nets domestically is something else which is quite important. The knowledge sharing on some of the countries that have pushed ahead with fiscal reform to be able to tackle this impact. So the short-term implication is a very dire one, and the reason why it's quite acute this time is because of the uncertainty around the length of the tightening as well as the length of the war. So this is what makes it this time quite difficult. One important aspect also at this juncture, and it's being discussed, is to try and alleviate or rethink about the surcharges that are that come with financing that comes from institutions for countries to alleviate some of the pressure on the fiscal side. The other element is coordination among more IFIs, and that is to maybe create guarantees or avail more financing at this very acute moment. So you're absolutely right that the short term needs to be tackled because of the implications it has on the long term as well.
Another short-term issue that arose within the last year and change is that so many countries that were dependent on trade with Russia became a geopolitical football. Egypt is one of the nations that obviously has spoken out against the invasion of Ukraine. There are some others in the region that have not, but to what extent has that issue been alleviated, and have they found other sources for trade, or should they continue to be trading with Russia, other nations in the region?
In the case of Egypt, we are a very big importer of wheat, and I think in my interview with GZERO last year, we also spoke about Egypt diversifying the sources of wheat import and some of the actions that were taken domestically in terms of increasing storage capacity and also giving incentives for farmers domestically to actually increase the produce. So I think countries are trying to be as innovative as possible to be able to alleviate the pressure from the shortages, particularly in grain supply.
Moving to those longer-term problems, so obviously Egypt was host to COP27. What concrete developments came out of it that you can point to, and what more do you hope happens in the coming year from the promises made there?
Of course, COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh last November came at a time when there was a lot of doubt around multilateralism given the geopolitical backdrop. Nonetheless, it was a very important event with many global leaders, more than 120 presidents there. Some of the key aspects and the theme that we had was from pledges to implementation. And given that also being in Africa, the focus on adaptation and resilience. So that when we're talking about climate action and the energy transition, we should not forget that also food security, water scarcity are as important as the energy security. So this was a very important outcome from COP. We have the adaptation facility which was there, and also loss and damage. For the first time, a trust fund for loss and damage for the countries that did not have investments to adapt, so then deforestation and so forth affected their communities. So the loss and damage trust fund, the adaptation story, and also coming up with a definition of just financing. And that is, yes, countries have a responsibility, but at the same time, there needs to be an equitable quality and quantity of finance that also respects the development pathway. And this is, we put together the Sharm el-Sheikh guidebook for just financing. It was an effort with multilateral development banks, philanthropists, private sector, so all stakeholders to basically try and identify what is it that each one needs to do to be able to achieve climate goals globally. But you won't be able to do that unless every country achieves its national climate goals as well.
Egypt is one of those countries that, while only a small emitter of carbon emissions, has borne a large bit of the consequence of climate change, and there are many nations like that. When we say, and I've heard you say this week, and many other leaders here, the world needs to be doing more, do we really need wealthy nations to be doing more? And what does that look like in your mind?
Yeah. I think the 100 billion that everybody, is out there, a lot of quantification on how much how much has been actually dispersed out of the 100 billion. As we are talking about the evolution roadmap of the World Bank, what is the role of multilateral development banks in creating concessional finance to crowd in private sector for climate action? So all of these are topics and items which do require additional financing. So we have discussions about countries giving more guarantees to allow that space. But if we are serious about moving ahead on climate, there needs to be the financing that matches it. And at the end of the day, and one very important backdrop, or it has to be underpinned by national priorities. So country ownership when it comes to climate action is extremely important. And in your question about COP, one of the things Egypt has done is we put together a country platform for the nexus of water, food, and energy. So there's an energy pillar with projects, water pillar, and a food pillar. And given our ability to leverage the international community and look for the pockets of climate finance, we've been able to mobilize financing for that platform. So it's country-led. It leverages the international community to de-risk private sector engagement. In COP28, we will be presenting the results of the platform in order to show that you can go from pledges to implementation if projects are ready, and if you are very clear, committed to climate action, very clear with your projects, and have credibility with the international community.
Outgoing World Bank President David Malpass has warned many times, but certainly this week, about impending debt crises happening in emerging economies all around the world. That sort of raises the question of, do the IMF and the World Bank, as established after World War II, have the tools they need for the next 50, 60 years? And is the way they've been doing business and conducting loans for the developing world in need of reform? I would ask you that question.
This is a question that has been on the table for some time. And when you look at the work streams in the G20 or in other initiatives, there's the international financial architecture. The UN Secretary General has called for that as well. What we have seen from the last October meetings, the fall meetings till today, in April, is a roadmap for the evolution of the World Bank. We have a first pillar of it presented yesterday in the Development Committee at the World Bank. There's a definition of what the evolved or the new World Bank will be looking at. And it has the twin goals of extreme poverty, shared prosperity, but ensuring that there's sustainable, resilient, and inclusive growth. So this is a very important dynamic. So the discussions are ongoing. The goal is by Marrakesh next October is to have an agreement on what the new World Bank would look like. And this is going to be extremely important because it will set the tone for other MDBs as well. So the discussions are ongoing. We had a roundtable yesterday with Secretary Yellen with different voices to basically go over some of the what was presented in the development committee yesterday. Two more tracks. One is on the operational model of the World Bank, and the other one is on the financing model as well. So we have moved from the discussion side to the implementation side on how the reform of the institutions will take place.
Secretary Yellen is just one of many U.S. officials who have warned against China's involvement in development and lending to the emerging world. How do you think China should participate in these conversations, and how should multilateral organizations be approaching China when it comes to issues like funding?
China is a member of all institutions, and if I take the case of Egypt. At the World Bank, and we are one of the big partners of the World Bank when it comes to project finance and even the private sector facility through IFC. So we are one of the countries that benefit from that. And China's on the board of the World Bank and is there. Also on the bilateral side, there is a cooperation that takes place. So, given when we're talking about World Bank evolution, we're talking about the multilateral banks. All shareholders are there. So this is also a fact that does exist.
Mm-hmm. Final question. So, you are, as the Minister of International Cooperation, what is the state of international cooperation today, and how could it be improved? And what biggest issue do you think, don't say climate because we've talked about it enough, but what issue would you like to see the world come together on quickly?
Yeah. I was just in a breakfast this morning on the Bridgetown initiative, and I think a very good colleague said that when we are here, there's so much common thinking on the topics, and then when everyone goes back home, everybody has to deal nationally. So I think pushing the message that fulfilling a national agenda and achieving national goals contributes to the global goals is one very important message. Because at the end of the day, whether it's the pandemic or the implications of war, we are more coupled than we think. This idea that the North versus the South and so forth, everybody's coupled. If it's through markets, if it's through food supplies, if it's through implications from pandemic. So I think I would emphasize that national goals are in line with the global goals, and we should work on pushing this forward.
Do you think that the pandemic taught us any real lessons? I mean, do you think that things have substantially changed coming out of the COVID pandemic?
It just taught us that no country can get out of the pandemic by itself. Vaccines production, vaccine distribution, it's nobody could do it by themselves. So this, I think, is the lesson, and we just need to remind ourselves that is the case.
Dr. Al-Mashat, thank you so much.
Thank you.